Hello and welcome again to this edition of Capitol Report here on WCMU Public Television. I'm David Nicholas, pleased to welcome back Representative Jim Lauer from Greenville. He is in his second term serving the 70th District. That includes Montcalm County and portions of Gratiot County. Good to see you again, sir.
Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
We don't want to incite panic in any way, but in present times, we need to ask about preparedness in your district with regards to the coronavirus. Has it had much of an impact? What are the health officials, schools, other public communal places, what are they telling you?
You know, when I was talking with some of our local health officials, the common sense things like washing your hands and trying to, avoid contact with people who are ill are what they're advocating for. I think a lot of people don't want to see a panic because at the end of the day, I think that the response has been really good to this. It's not even really a crisis yet because of the response has been so good. So I think we just need to keep an eye on it and use common sense and try not to touch our face and keep our hands clean. So I think it's going to be handled quite well.
We have seen, of course, a lot of major cities and the occurrences on the West Coast, schools in Seattle shutting down and so forth. Gets us to the subject of education, the K-12 budget debate. Always a focus of attention at this time of year. Your thoughts on what Governor Whitmer has proposed for fiscal 2021, and so far what's been the reaction of the educators in your district?
I think there's a lot to like in the proposed budget. One thing that we're going to need to do some work on is over the last several years we've had what they call a 2X formula, which is where schools that are at the lower rung of the funding level get 2 times the increase of those at the top. The governor's proposing a 1.5 instead of 2, so that'd be a huge impact for the schools in my area because every one of them qualifies for and has qualified for the 2X formula.
Given that amount of time, how close or how closer are those districts, and a lot of them in our viewing area, like those in your district, would be those that qualify. We're not hitting some of those major downstate metro areas and so forth. How much closer have we gotten that gap?
It's actually amazing how much we've closed the gap over the last 10 years as we've been doing this 2X formula. The gap between the highest funded per pupil schools and the lowest funded is only about $300, $350 now in the state. So we've rapidly closed that. Even from the time when I started in office, it was much higher than that, the gap, and we're on track if we can keep using the 2X formula to close that within the next 3 or 4 budgets. So that'd be pretty exciting to get everybody to an equal funding level, at least on a per pupil basis.
Does the overall funding formula need to change, or does 2X just sort of get written into the process to make sure that the gap doesn't start to widen again if we look back to mid-90s and the way everything was originally structured around Proposal A and so forth?
I think if we can get everyone to a baseline that's equal as far as their per pupil goes, then we can start having these conversations about, busing in rural areas and some of the added costs that schools in my district have compared to ones that are in the more metropolitan areas. I mean, for example, some of the schools that are already higher funded also don't have some of these built-in costs, such as the transportation needs and things of that nature. So I'd like to close the gap and then start talking about how we can even out some of those disparities as well.
What are those costs? Kind of a ballpark figure or a snapshot of what it's like in your district where the students are undoubtedly on the bus for a lot longer time, and those buses have to cover a lot larger area, obviously, and that all coming directly out of that initial per pupil fund.
That's right. I meet with the superintendents of the schools in Montcalm County on a monthly basis. We have a roundtable discussion. It's something that we talk about frequently. When you look at each individual school district in the county, they're spending millions of dollars on transportation needs. And even when I was a kid, I was on the bus for over an hour because I grew up in this area. So I certainly understand what that looks like because we are so rural in most of the districts compared to you get closer to Grand Rapids or closer to Detroit, and the geographic footprint of the school district is much, much smaller. Yet in a lot of cases, they're actually getting even more funding, maybe because property values are higher or they ended up at the higher end of this per pupil allotment. So it is kind of a double whammy, and that's why we'll be fighting very hard to keep this 2X formula because there's just a lot more needs in the rural area for those costs.
It's Capitol Report here on WCMU with our guest, Representative Jim Lauer, this week. There's also a recent report from the Citizens Research Council that some districts have been working to attract both homeschool students and those that have been attending private schools, trying to bolster the numbers. If we look back to the long period we had in declining enrollment that's still impacting many of the schools. Have you seen any evidence of this going on in the school districts where you are, in the 70th?
Sure. There is a very large homeschool population in the 70th district, and there's also a very large population of students that go to, a parochial school, be it a Catholic school or a private Christian school, and things of that nature. So I think this type of a competition is very healthy. I think it makes all schools and all programs better if they are trying to actively attract these students and parents that would otherwise like to do the schooling at home or through these other resources. So I think competition, whether it be in schools or just in the marketplace, generally leads to a better product.
Have you seen enough of a problem when it comes to the declining enrollment where districts have looked at combining any of the services, or maybe if there were 2 or 3 schools where some are shuttered for a period of time because the numbers are not there as they were in prior years?
That's something that, has gone on locally over many years. I mean, you even look at Carson City Crystal Schools, that combined a number of years ago into the consolidated school district. I know to the south of us, Palo Schools has since folded in with Ionia Public Schools. So you see stuff like that happening in the viewing area, and it's natural that it would. If there's so much fixed cost with having a building and a lot of overhead, and if you don't have the students to justify that, then of course those are things that'll have to happen over time.
Montcalm Community College obviously is a major presence in the district as well. The governor has proposed increases for higher ed. Any reaction from them, at least so far, as to what the governor has put on the table?
So one of the most important things for MCC right now is this process of joint capital outlay, which is where the state partners with community colleges and universities on building improvements. And if you look at the Sydney campus, they haven't had a capital outlay project in 11 years, and many of the buildings are still original to when it was built in the 60s. So I just toured that, and we had MCC and their president in Lansing this week to talk to the Appropriations Committee about their needs, because as they have some really solid programs there for nursing and a whole host of other programs, but what they need is some updated equipment and some updated teaching spaces. So Senator Outman and I are advocating on their behalf to get that project into this year's budget.
Are they looking specifically at some needs to address the now ever-changing needs of the workforce? Because we've seen, even as we sit here on the campus of CMU, sometimes obviously the community colleges can be a little more nimble in changing to bring programs in, and we have seen such a change in what the needs of the labor force are. What is MCC doing to address those?
Absolutely. So MCC has 2 different campuses. They have their Sydney campus, and then they have their campus in Greenville. The campus in Greenville is a little newer, and it has been recently upgraded for workforce development. So a lot of their skilled trades and workforce type programs go on there. They do have some at the Sydney campus, but the capital outlay project I was talking about was actually geared towards their nursing program. They have a long-term plan over the next 10 years for how they want to update and how they want to attract students and meet the needs of employers. And I think they've been very, very good at working with local employers, both in Montcalm County and in the region, on offering the types of classes that they need the students to have so they have the right skills. So answer to the question is yes, they have been doing that. I think they've been very successful at it. And like I said, there's still a huge need in nursing, and that's why they're trying to address that need with this year's budget.
The status of the skilled trades programs in the schools, other training opportunities, as we have seen that shift, and obviously a decline, a lot of people retiring from the workforce in a lot of those areas. How has the 70th district weathered that, or is weathering that to address those needs coming up?
So what's pretty interesting is a lot of the K-12 schools are making a shift back towards skilled trades. It's something I've talked on this program a lot about, and something I campaigned on when I first ran, so it's pretty exciting. One thing that's also interesting is a lot of employers are offering their own in-house apprenticeship and welding type programs. Over in Alma, for example, Merrill has the Merrill Institute, and for a very low cost, an individual can go in there and be trained to become a welder, and they can be either hired by Merrill or other companies that need them. So we're trying to look at how can we help them get students cover the cost of programs like that, because they don't fit into your normal your normal bucket of scholarships, right? Because it's not a university, it's not a K-12 school, and it's not a community college, but at the same time it's providing skills. So right now the student has to pay it out of pocket unless they happen to have a GI Bill. So as we talk about the governor's Going Pro proposal and Reconnect, I want to make sure we look at these employer-based programs as well, because they are fitting into a lot of needs.
Another sector of the workforce where we've had shortages is in corrections. A lot of overtime pay. Folks are telling me that to keep the facilities staffed, even as we have seen the prison population decrease. You mentioned the Carson City Crystal School District, the correctional facility there in Carson City. What are the conditions there?
So Representative Thomas Elbert chairs our corrections budget in the House of Representatives, and he neighbors me just to the south in the 86th District, which is part of Ionia and part of Kent County, where I grew up actually, and there's actually 4 prisons in that district, and there's 2 in mine. I have St. Louis and Carson City, as you mentioned. And when I'm talking with Representative Albert, and when I'm talking with a lot of the COs that live and work in our district, they are understaffed, and that's causing a lot of these overtime problems, and a lot of them feel like it's actually creating a more dangerous work environment than it has been in the past. So that's something that we're very interested in correcting, and we're trying to get a training program up and running to get people into those jobs and get them compensated at a level where we can retain the talent that's there, because that's a very tough job. It's a job that frankly I wouldn't want to do, and I really respect the people that do that, and they voluntarily go into a prison for several hours a day and week. I mean, it's a very tough environment to work in, and it's no surprise to me that, you know, as the economy has been doing better, people are looking at other job opportunities that are probably less dangerous and maybe less stressful. So we have to recognize that and react to it, because like you said, we're having a lot of people that are working overtime and covering shifts, and I think it's a big problem. It's something that Rep. Albert and I are very interested in solving.
We are seeing some of the lowest rates in many years for recidivism in the Michigan prison system. What has this done? At the same time, we're seeing the prison population drop and a lower recidivism, yet the shortage of workers. How are all those numbers kind of colliding and mushing together in the middle? What are we looking at?
Absolutely. So if you look at it, the recidivism rate is down, which has always been the goal of corrections. But if you look at these shortages and these staffing issues, I think that the amount of staff has dropped even quicker than the amount of inmates has. So I think that's part of what's causing the problem. But you know, it's a good problem to have that you have less people going to prison. I think we've done a lot better job over the last 10 and 20 years of when somebody goes to prison, we're not just warehousing them, we're trying to address whatever issues they have, so when they get out, they don't just end up back in the system. So that's actually been very successful. It's something that we knew would take a really long time to get addressed, but we're starting to see the fruits of it.
The governor's bonds for roads plan moving forward, what can you see as far as that's coming into shape with funding plans that the lawmakers, even at the end of the Snyder administration, had been putting into place in terms of addressing the roads needs in your area?
So currently in the state of Michigan, there's basically 3 buckets of funding for roads. There's the state trunk lines, and then there's the funding that the county road commissions get, and then there's the funding that cities and villages get. So the bonding only addresses state trunk lines. So we're talking about $3.5 billion, of which basically none of the local roads in my district will get any of that funding. So we just unveiled a proposal yesterday, actually, that will take that into account. So as we get ready to do the budget for this year, we're going to scale back on the money that we're putting in the budget into state trunk lines and increase the money we're giving to local roads. The thought being that, okay, if we're going to bond and we're going to put $3.5 billion into state trunk lines, what about the local roads? So we'll pull back on the funding that we're putting into state trunk lines in the year-to-year budget because of the bonding, and take that money and put it into our county and our local roads. So that's a proposal that House Republicans unveiled yesterday. In addition to that, we want to take the money that's going at the pump in the form of sales tax and make sure that goes to roads as well. So we've unveiled that plan as well, because right now you pay gas tax at the pump. There's also sales tax on that doesn't go to roads. So we want to make sure if you're paying tax at the pump at a gas station, that money is going directly into our roads.
Do we have plans that were authorized here prior to the bond proposal that can they be altered in any way in terms of the commitments, as you say, to do that shift? Obviously here moving forward, knowing the bonds are there, but do we have to look at any changes to commitments that have been made in terms of refocusing that money more on some of these local roads.
That's what we're trying. That's exactly what we're trying to do. Now, I do want to say that I didn't think the bonds were a good idea. We're very close to paying off the bonding from the Engler administration. We probably had about $400 million left in bonding from roads that, frankly, probably need fixing again. And the same will be true with these bonds. You know, we're bonding for $3.5 billion. We're going to be paying it out. My son, who's 2 years old, is not even in the workforce. He'll get to pay for these bonds when he starts working, probably around the time he's in high school and as he goes forward. So that's not, in my opinion, a smart way to do roads, because they need to be routinely maintained and updated. So you're locking in a fixed bond payment for something that's just not going to last that long. But that said, if that's what the governor wants to do, she has the authority to do it, and what we'd like to see is this funding go into the local roads to pair that with the bonding.
Up front, before you and the legislature looked at it from the perspective that you are of shifting your priority to the local roads, the immediate reaction was that all of that burden would be on the local governments. You do chair the Local Government and Municipal Finance Committee. That seems like a place where this issue could kind of come to a head in terms of what the locals could potentially or would be being asked to do. Is that the case?
Yeah, we're taking a strong look at, like I said, the money that we're getting into local governments for roads, but we're also looking at revenue sharing, because as we weathered this recession, revenue sharing payments to counties, cities, villages, and townships were not near as high as they had been in the past. And that makes sense, because we had budget shortfalls, so I think everybody understands that. But now, as the economy is doing better and the state's budget's doing better, a lot of the services that people think of when they think of the government, whether it be police or plowing the roads or fire services, making sure, you know, garbage is being picked up, water, those types of things, a lot of that is handled locally. So if we can get a restoration to the revenue sharing payments, I think it'll help local governments not have to raise property taxes continually, as you've seen in the past.
One of the fallouts from the governor's 45% or 45-cent at the pump gas tax proposal for the roads last year was that as the budget process moved forward, there was over 140 vetoes that were issued. How many of those directly affected legislation that you were either sponsoring or were a part of the support of that had to be readdressed? We know that several things were reinstated, some things still on the books now, kind of like unfinished business to come back to. What is the status as far as you personally for?
I would say pretty much every single one of them impacted something I had either worked on as a lead sponsor or had worked on in a support role as a co-sponsor, or just helping usher it through the process in my leadership and chairman roles. I'll point to a couple specific examples that maybe didn't get as much attention as others. Senator Stamas and I went through and did a major property tax assessing reform last session, and included with that was $1 million for new training for local assessors. And this is a really important function of our government, because it affects so many things, and it also affects people's bottom line and what they're paying in property taxes. So making sure the person doing that job is getting it right is something that the senator and I took very seriously. The governor vetoed the funding for that new training program that we put in, and that has not been restored yet. You take a look at another program, was the veteran service, county level veteran services. Representative Wentworth and I, who's also in your viewing area, he spent a lot of time trying to normalize and get some help to counties on how they're going to deliver and administer veteran services. It was a great program, had bipartisan support, and passed with flying colors, and there was about $3 million in funding for that program. That was vetoed as well, and I don't believe has been restored yet. So those are just a couple of examples. Obviously, the autism funding and some of the other funding. I mean, if you look at the funding for charter schools, for example, these are public schools that parents choose to send their children to. Instead of them getting an increase in funding, the governor vetoed that pretty arbitrarily, if you think about it, because these parents and these students are no different than the kids that go to the traditional public school, but for political reasons, the governor felt like it'd be a good idea to veto the funding for those. That one has been restored, but again, it just gives you a flavor of how broad-based a lot of the vetoes were, and it was something that was unfortunate, and we're trying to avoid this year. As
vice chair of Tax Policy Committee, you mentioned the work with Senator Stamas. Any other issues that then, along with trying to still address that property tax package that we can expect to be coming through that committee?
Right. So then, interesting things. I'm vice chair of tax policy, and I chair the local government and municipal finance. And those two committees work in tandem. So if you look at something that relates to property taxes or local tax revenue, that typically goes to the committee that I'm chair of. If it's more of a statewide tax, so if it's an income tax, a business tax, things of that nature, it goes to tax policy. One thing that we're going to probably take a pretty serious look at is how we're taxing things like wind and solar, and that could go to either committee, because the way that works right now, it's such a new technology, it doesn't necessarily make the most sense the way we're doing it now. So that's something that, as we have a lot of wind production in the 70th district and solar is coming on, it's something that I'm interested in making sure that as we go forward, we have a tax structure that makes sense for the people who need the revenue at the local level, but also makes sense for the businesses that want to bring in these new energy opportunities.
As part of that Energy and Technology Committee, are there other initiatives that we're seeing potentially on the horizon? Any other developments in terms of improving the efficiency of wind or upgrading the efficiency for solar, or other technologies that we're not even aware of yet?
One thing that I'm working on, and it's something that I think is really interesting, they've had it for 20, 30, 40 years, is these biomass energy production facilities that they take old railroad ties, they take old tires, they take scrap wood from places that produce pallets and plywood, things of that nature, and they burn it in a clean way, and they turn it into energy, stuff that would otherwise end up in a landfill. So it's pretty exciting that we have these. No new have been built in the last, 30 years probably, and the ones that we do have are getting close to the end of their useful life. Plus,
why did we see the slowdown in that that development or that production?
For some reason, they're not viewed as green technology as much as, say, a wind or solar, which they perform because it has a smokestack basically. But if you think about it, this stuff's otherwise going in a landfill, and I'm really excited about it. I think it's amazing that we're already doing this. They're mixing, ground up tires in with wood, all stuff that has to be thrown away anyway, burning it in a clean way that then gets it, keeps it from going in the landfill and makes power. So we need to look at how those plants are being compensated and make sure that at a minimum they need to stay open, but I'd actually like to see more of that, as we look at different things, like whether it's solar, wind, traditional natural gas. I think these have a place, and I'm trying to bring that forward on the Energy Committee.
You mentioned the clean burn, that some of those older facilities, let alone if newer ones could be built, that technology has obviously got to be much better than it would have been, say, 30 years ago.
Right. The problem is, the way they're compensated, right, for the service that they provide, it doesn't necessarily take into account that they're, keeping garbage from going into a landfill. So we need to take that into account, as we pay them for the service they're providing. I think that's probably the biggest problem. And they don't get viewed, as green technology, even though they are doing, I think, a very positive thing for the environment.
3 minutes left as we kind of shift to health policy. We started by asking about the status of the coronavirus in your district, but swinging it back around to the broader health policy, what are we seeing in terms of the major work that will be coming through that committee? Every single week we have bills in that committee, most of which I think are really good and make a lot of sense. Since we don't have a lot of time, I'll just talk about something that's very important to our area that's my number one priority, this year for the committee, and it's this idea of PBMs, they're called, or pharmacy benefit managers. They essentially act as a middleman between insurance companies and patients and pharmacies that need prescription drugs, and what ends up happening is it drastically increases the cost for patients, and it leads to a lot of the profits for small mom and pop pharmacies being skimmed off by essentially a middleman. So we need to do something about that, because it's leading to two bad outcomes. One, the price of prescription drugs ends up being a lot higher, but two, the pharmacy where a lot of people want to get their prescriptions locally, instead of having to drive 20 minutes or 30 minutes in a rural area like mine, they want to be able to go into the small one in Edmore or in Lakeview or in Stanton, towns like that. They're not going to be able to stay open because so much of the revenue that they rely on is being siphoned off. So there's a broad-based coalition of both Republicans and Democrats that want to take a strong look at this issue and find a way to reform it. The problem is it's a pretty when you're fighting a pharmaceutical industry or company, it's going to be a tough battle, but it's something that I take really seriously. Can you get the traction for something like this when the proposal is out there to codify the Affordable Care Act, and that's going to obviously garner a lot of headlines and attention and oxygen in the room?
I think we can because, like I said, there's a bipartisan group of legislators that have identified this issue as a problem, and we recognize it. We recognize what it's doing to the community and what it's doing to the price of drugs. So while you have the Affordable Care Act thing that's being put out there, that's not going to get a lot of traction just because it's so much more controversial and doesn't really have any bipartisan support at all. But what I'm talking about is more solution-oriented, is something we can actually do and can actually get done.
Well, good luck on getting the other unfinished business, the things that came through with the vetoes back on the books, back getting attention and moving back through the process again, as well as all the things we've had a chance to cover. As always, appreciate your time and the update.
Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
And thank you for your time and attention as well. We've been speaking with Representative Jim Lauer in his second term for the state's 70th House District. A reminder that this and all of our programs you can find on our website. That's at WCMU.org. Go through the links for TV and to the specific page for Capitol Report for this and all of our other programs. We will continue to watch, obviously, developments with the budget and guests coming up in the next few weeks as well. Thank you for your time, as always, and we will talk again soon.